Coming up, Giannis dominates the Nets and LeBron stays winless. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? You are listening to Locked On Game to Game NBA. I'm your host, Daniella Bruce, and thank you for making Locked On Game to Game your first listen every weekday. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On NBA and your team's local Locked On podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. We've got all of our Locked On NBA hosts here to tell you everything you need to know from last night in the NBA. The Nets and Bucks brought the star power to Milwaukee on Wednesday, with the hometown Bucks riding Giannis's 43 points to win. Locked On Bucks and Nets go over the biggest game of the night in the NBA.
It was a rusty first half, but a scintillating second half. The Bucks beat the Nets 110-99. My name's Kane Pittman, the host of the Locked On Bucks podcast. Giannis was absolutely dominant. We're going to break down this 43.14 rebound performance on the postgame show. But for now, at least, I want to talk about Bobby Portis. 20 points, 11 rebounds in this game. And again, he was the injector of energy for this team when they needed it in the third quarter. He signed a 4-year, $49 million contract in the offseason. To me, this is going to be one of the great bargains. He's been playing for nothing the last few years and been an every night contributor, spot starter, fourth quarter player for the Bucks. Bobby Portis has become one of the more bargain players in the league. This is why he's a fan favorite tonight. Offensive rebounds, getting the crowd going, consistent offense. This is just what he does. You know what to expect from Bobby, and that's why everyone in that city absolutely loves him. Check out the Locked On Bucks podcast Monday to Friday on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
Another third quarter collapse for the Brooklyn Nets, and they find themselves on the losing end once again, this time at the hands of the Milwaukee Bucks. I'm Adam Arnbeck with the Locked On Nets podcast, and a familiar theme is starting to occur here. Brooklyn Nets are struggling to find their rhythm offensively. Ben Simmons need not be discussed because he is still unable to find himself, and even more importantly, we're now seeing that there is a stark contrast between what the offense looks like with and without him. And for all those little glimpses that we catch, there is still a total lack of consistency. Right now, this team is still, as you would expect, incredibly reliant on the play of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And in a game like this, where there's physicality, there's chippiness again from the Milwaukee Bucks, just like they saw against the Memphis Grizzlies, the Nets just maybe don't have something that they called for in the offseason, a physicality, a tenacity, a little bit of an edge to their game, playing with a sense of urgency. They didn't show it necessarily to start this game. They got back into it and had a lead at halftime. Once again, lost it in the third, could not find a way in the fourth, and will continue to be the running theme of this team. Where are they from continuity? Where are they from a role identification? And where are they from a coaching standpoint, especially when you saw Steve Nash go absolutely nuclear in this one and get thrown out? We'll continue to break this all down over on the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.
It took overtime, but the New York Knicks stayed undefeated at Madison Square Garden this season with a win over the Hornets. Our Locked On Knicks host tells you who came up big to get New York the victory.
Gavin Shull of the Locked On Knicks podcast following a 134-131 victory for the New York Knicks over the Charlotte Hornets. There's one clear name to talk about coming out of this one, and it is Jalen Brunson. The first-year Knick had a signature performance with 27 points, 13 assists, 7 boards, hitting monster shot after monster shot down the stretch at 3 to ensure the Knicks would make it into overtime, and a silky smooth fadeaway to help them win it in OT. But what stood out to me was his passing. He's never averaged more than 5 assists per game in his career, and there have been questions of, all right, is he a solid passer? Is he a good one? Is there potential for him to be a great one? He threw some elite ones tonight. A no-look one-hander to Evan Fournier in transition certainly stood out, and then that was topped in OT, where the Hornets tried to trap him at the top of the key, and Brunson manipulated it brilliantly, escaping the trap, looking towards the right side of the arc, and then throwing a no-look to Mitchell Robinson for a dunk. There were issues galore for the Knicks tonight defensively. RJ Barrett still has some stuff to figure out, but it's another win. The Knicks are 3-1.
Rising star Evan Mobley led the way for the Orlando Magic in their win over the Cleveland Cavaliers. Our Locked On Cavs host goes over his impact in the final minutes.
Hey everyone, Evan Damerel here, co-host of Locked On Cavs, the Locked On Now takeaway after the Cleveland Cavaliers' Wednesday night win over the Orlando Magic. There are a lot of questions and concerns about whether or not Evan Mobley is feeling right. JB Bickerstaff said post-game that this is technically his preseason, and I think we're starting to see a little bit more from Evan Mobley after he had a very solid outing and he kind of put the team on his back in the second half and put away a very young and scrappy Orlando Magic team. Hear about this and more on tomorrow's Locked On Cavs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
The Orlando Magic still haven't done enough to get a win in 5 tries this season, but Locked On Magic still has positives for the rebuilding Orlando squad.
Well, the Magic are 0-5, and once again, the fight is there, but the details are not, even if Paolo Banchero is really good. This is Philip Rossman, the host of Locked On Magic, and the Orlando Magic fall to the Cleveland Cavaliers 103-92. There are still a lot of pieces to this Magic puzzle that need to be resolved. We know this is not a perfect roster. We know that Paolo Banchero is probably a really, really good player, and Franz Wagner's also pretty darn good himself. But this Orlando Magic team continues to struggle to put all those pieces together to make a win. The big takeaway from this game is that Orlando's margin for error is still incredibly small. And really what the deal is trust. They got to trust each other. They got to trust their defense. They got to trust the system that they're running. And if they don't, they're going to continue to struggle exactly like this. The Magic are not getting blown out. This isn't some low-rung team getting beat up every single night. They are in these fights. They are tantalizingly close, and they do have a true star coming in Paolo Banchero. But the Magic haven't put all the pieces together, and until then, the results are going to remain the same. This has been Philip Rossman. We'll have a lot more coming up on Locked On Magic later on, but until then, we'll see you next time.
The Chicago Bulls scored 76 points in the first half, more than enough to hold off the Pacers the rest of the way. Locked On Bulls and Pacers tells you what separated these teams so early in Chicago.
The Chicago Bulls get their second win in a row, this time against the Indiana Pacers at home. Despite getting out to an early lead, it got a little tight there in the third quarter, but the Bulls were able to withstand that and still win the game. I'm Hayes, one of the hosts of Locked On Bulls, and the Bulls today showed exactly what is going to make this team a dangerous team throughout the season, getting over 30 points just from their bench unit. This is the same team last season that sometimes struggled to get double digits from their bench in full games, going into the half over 20 points, ending the game with 30 points from the bench. Zach LaVine also having his best game since his return from injury, going 6 for 13 in this game, 10 for 12 from the free throw line, good enough for 28 points. And the Bulls do this without DeMar DeRozan being and having to be his normal DeMarvelous self and really, showing up big for the Bulls. Having 10 players score in this game is what led this team to victory. And the defense, kicking up their defensive intensity when needed. Patrick Williams also maybe working himself out of that slump. Will this continue to pay off for the Bulls? Well, we'll continue to see it. And you can follow and see how we talk about that over on Locked On Bulls. Make sure you follow us there. Peace.
Tony is here, the host of Locked On Pacers, inside the United Center, where the Pacers just fell to the Bulls 124-109, and the Pacers, like I said after the first game, are going to have a ton of games that look like this. Their starting five just cannot defend right now. They give up 76 first-half points to this Bulls team and could not overcome it despite a huge third quarter where Buddy Hield and Jalen Smith were hitting shots. Despite only giving up 48 points in the second half, the Pacers still lost by 15 because, once again, their defense to start the game was simply not good enough. Adding in Miles Turner to the mix didn't help despite his 4 blocks, despite his ability to corral ball handlers. Adding in Aaron Nesmith to the starting five a few days ago didn't necessarily click with what they were doing with Turner in this game. So, in general, Pacers have a lot to figure out at the start of these games, and this one was another example of those poor starts. We'll have more tomorrow on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
Coming up, the Timberwolves get revenge and the Lakers are still without a win. This is Locked On Game to Game NBA. If you haven't already, download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up to play daily fantasy sports. Prize Picks allows you to pick 2 to 5 players, and if they will go score more or less than their projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. No competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you can watch. This includes the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL hockey, the PGA, college football, and so much more. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. So go to prizepicks.com right now or download the Prize Picks app, and don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Welcome back to Locked On Game to Game NBA. I'm your host, Daniella Bruce, and thank you so much for making Locked On your first listen every single weekday. The Minnesota Timberwolves got revenge after taking a big loss to the Spurs on Monday by beating San Antonio on Wednesday. Our Locked On Wolves host tells you what changed in just a couple of days.
After a debacle of a performance on Monday night against the same San Antonio Spurs team, the Timberwolves beat the Spurs by 12 on Wednesday behind 34 from Anthony Edwards. I'm Ben Beacon with Locked On Wolves. Ant had 15 and 4 assists in the first quarter alone, making 5 3-pointers in the first frame, had 34 on the night. Karl-Anthony Towns had 21 points and 7 assists. And the second half was really all about Jalen Noel. Jalen Noel had a monster third quarter, including a highlight reel double clutch, two-handed dunk over Jakob Poeltl. And ended up with 23 points on 13 shots, 3 made threes for Jalen Noel. So the first quarter was all about Ant. The third quarter was all about Jalen Noel. And the Wolves avoided a complete third quarter collapse. They made things a little bit interesting. Did give up 41 points in the third frame to the Spurs. But that was as much about San Antonio making difficult shots as it was about the Wolves defensively. This was an all-around much better performance than Monday. There's no question about that. We'll break it down further, get into individual performances on Locked On Wolves. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Wolves for all things Timberwolves.
The Jazz's surprise start to the season continued last night. Utah won their 4th game in 5 to start the year by beating Houston. Locked On Jazz recaps another win and says the Jazz have found their go-to guy.
The Utah Jazz got revenge for their loss the other night in Houston with a 109-101 win on a home-and-home against the Houston Rockets to move to 4-1 on the season. David Locke along with you from Locked On Jazz. The Jazz were in foul trouble all night long. Jordan Clarkson, 3 fouls early. Will Hardy gambled, let him play throughout the second quarter. He answered the bell for him. Mike Conley got in foul trouble in the third, had to sit, where Talen Horton-Tucker then came in as the backup point guard for the Jazz with Colin Sexton out with an oblique injury. And Horton-Tucker had a fabulous night for the Jazz with 14 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2 steals. Lauri Markkanen has established himself as the go-to guy, 24 points, 9 rebounds, and 3 assists for the Jazz. The Jazz led by 19. The Rockets cut it to 2, but were never able to take the lead as the Jazz stretched it back out and win their 4th game in their first 5. More coming up on Locked On Jazz.
The Lakers stayed winless, now 0-4 after the latest loss on Wednesday. Locked On Lakers reviews the situation as things seemingly keep getting worse for LA.
This is Andy Kamenetsky, co-host of the Locked On Lakers podcast, and the Lakers fall to 0-4 after a 110-99 loss in Denver to the Nuggets. This was a game where Russell Westbrook, often regarded as the sole cause of every Laker woe, didn't play because of a hamstring injury, and yet the Lakers looked more or less the same as they have all season, unless I guess you're encouraged by the 27% shooting from behind the arc, because that is their best clip of the season so far. The offense still struggling, the Lakers still getting out-rebounded, and throw in an uncharacteristically wild night from LeBron James and Anthony Davis, often grimacing through his production, and it's pretty clear the Lakers are in some trouble right now. A lot more to get into, so make sure you are subscribing to the Locked On Lakers YouTube channel and that you're making Locked On Lakers your first listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Miami Heat made beating the previously unbeaten Trailblazers look easy on Wednesday night. Miami sent the fans in Portland to the parking lots early in the blowout, and Locked On Heat runs through the packed box score.
What a difference it makes when the shots are actually falling, as they did for Miami when they hit a season-high 15 three-pointers in a 119-98 blowout win over Portland. I'm David Ramil, the co-host of Locked On Heat. The Heat kicked off a West Coast road trip against the previously unbeaten Blazers, looking for answers after a 1-3 start to their season, and they found them versus Portland, forcing 19 turnovers, gang rebounding to slow down Portland's fast break opportunities, and making 40% of their threes. The Heat also caught a break as Damian Lillard was forced out of the game in the third quarter after sustaining a calf injury. Without Lillard, who already had 22 points in the night, the Heat were able to extend their lead, pressuring Portland ball handlers while igniting their own transition offense. Caleb Martin, back from his 1-game suspension, was fantastic with 16 points, 8 rebounds, and 4 steals. This was the version of the Heat that many had been waiting for, and sometimes it really is a make-or-miss league. Heat starters were able to get their rest, and they'll need it when they take on the Warriors tomorrow. To get more coverage of the game, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Heat.
Portland hadn't lost before taking a beating from Miami. Locked On Blazers tells you what changed this time around.
The Blazers are undefeated no more. They lose 119-98 to the Miami Heat at home. But the story of this game is Damian Lillard exits in the third quarter with a calf strain. I'm Mike Richmond, host of Locked On Blazers. With 5 minutes left in the third quarter, Damian Lillard signaled to the bench that he had that he was limping and had an issue. He immediately went back to the locker room, and a few minutes later, the Blazers announced he was done for the night with a calf strain. The Blazers lose the first game in a blowout, but this is more about losing their point guard. What happens with Dame in the future in the coming days is going to be the big story from this game, but 4-1, undefeated, no more. All eyes will be on the injury report. Tune in to Locked On Blazers for more.
That's all for Locked On Game to Game NBA. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. Be sure to subscribe to Locked On NBA and your team's local podcast for more NBA coverage every single day of the week. I'm Daniella Bruce, and this has been Locked On Game to Game.